But let's start by putting the focus on the NBFC space as the liquidity crunch continues to put pressure on NBFCs. How do companies like Chola Investment and Finance plan on tackling this crisis going forward? We have with us the Executive Vice President and CFO of the company, that's Arulselvan, joining in on the phone line to really help us with an outlook for the sector as well as the business going forward. Welcome to the show, Mr. Arulselvan. Pleasure to have you on. Most recently, let me just start by getting your key takeaways from the kind of comments that we've seen coming in from the Reserve Bank of India. There was a lot of expectation baked into this policy meeting, and possibly the comments that followed from the RBI governor as well as the speech that he gave shortly after haven't been anything concrete. You know, he has spoken about how the RBI does want to continue to keep some kind of a supportive environment for the NBFC sector, wants it to be a well-functioning NBFC sector as well. But how do you read these comments? Do you see this to mean that the RBI is working on something substantial in terms of supporting the sector at this point in time? What would be the need of the hour?
The RBI has been supportive by infusing liquidity through various means, like the OMOs, and then they have also introduced the swap transactions, which has infused liquidity. But unfortunately, and even the repo rate reductions help. But what is also happening, unfortunately, is the banks are not passing on this liquidity back to the NBFCs, and they are being selective in lending to very selective NBFCs, basis their own experience of the credit profile of the NBFCs. While from Chola's perspective, these have been, this has not impacted because we are seen as one of the credible players, and we have been getting good amount of liquidity from the banks. But for the industry, especially small players, they may be going through a stressful period because they are not getting the credit from banks. Today, the mutual fund industry is stuck with a lot of redemption pressures, and what is also happening is they are not lending long, and they want to keep liquidity abundant by lending very short periods, like in commercial paper, 7 days, 14 days, and less than a month type, which is not helpful because today the need of the hour is to borrow for a longer period, because short-term money is not ideal in the current ALM situation for NBFCs. And the other part is, in spite of 3 repo rate reductions, the cost of funds under the MCLR of the banks have not come down. They have been very static. Almost 75 basis points are were reduced over the last 3 policy announcements, but unfortunately, hardly 10 to 15 basis points reduction is what we have seen, and that too in very limited number of banks. So one is liquidity is tight, and funds is costlier, continues to be costlier in spite of RBI's efforts to ease liquidity and bring down the costs.
In fact, Mr. Arulselvan, let me then get an update from you. You know, we've been speaking off and on every month or so over the course of the last 7 months when we've seen this kind of liquidity crisis persist. Where do things stand at this point in time? In spite of all the steps that you've laid out, at least anecdotally what we're picking up is that cost of funds remains high, money remains tight, there is a massive crunch as far as liquidity goes. I know that yours is amongst the NBFCs that has possibly been able to stave off some of this pressure, but how do things stand for you? What has been the movement as far as cost of funds is concerned?
See, I think the bank should, progressively pass on this benefit of repo rate reductions. Even the OMO, auctions has helped only banks shore up their liquidity, and they have not passed on the credit and the cost of fund reductions. So, today banks are comfortable knowing that they are the only source of funds, so they are able to take or call the shots with regard to the rates, and that is what is happening today. And while I'm thankful to them for extending liquidity to us and select few NBFCs, they should be the conduit for passing on liquidity at affordable cost to the NBFC industry, which is unfortunately not happening in the quantity quantum that is expected by the industry. The quantum is very limited. Banks are also cautious because while there are a lot of good NBFCs, there are also some doubtful, or there are some cases where there are doubts persist, and so the banks are very cautious in lending. Today, we don't know whether what is the criteria to go by. Rating by itself has not become the criteria to depend on to lend to an institution, which has become very doubtful, because if you see actually.
In fact, what would be the solution then? Should we be looking at a special window, perhaps the RBI pushing PSU banks to be lending to NBFCs, or to your mind, what would be the kind of solution that we should be looking at here? And also, if you could give us a sense for your company, at what cost are you borrowing at the moment?
We are borrowing at around 9% or sub 9%, in most of the cases, which is the MCLR plus a little bit of spread. Like most of the MCLRs are at around 865, 875 levels, and we are borrowing with around 20 to 25 basis points spread on that. So we are trying to keep our costs, and we have been able to keep our costs below the 9% level on an all-inclusive basis, including fees and other aspects. But I don't know whether that will be the case with many other industries, many other participants in the industry. The liquidity window option is okay, but the problem is even earlier ones, I think in 2008, RBI did open up this window. There have been very few takers because the pricing for that continues to be very high. And, again the same credit issue and, will crop up with the banks being, very cautious in lending to entities which they may, see as a little bit of a suspect.
All right, point taken. So perhaps a special, liquidity window may not be the entire solution. A lot of nuance really to the kind of problem that is facing the industry at this point in time. Let me talk about, your business then. In spite of the kind of crunch that we're seeing on the liquidity side of things, your disbursements have actually been quite strong, and that's not the trend that we've seen across the board. Where are you seeing traction at this point in time? And so far, as far as the first quarter is concerned, how have things been looking? Can we expect any sort of an improvement in certain pockets as we go into fiscal 20?
With regard to our lending side?
That's right, disbursements.
Yeah, we are predominantly focused on the auto segment, while there have been a slowdown in heavy commercial vehicle and cars and MEVs. What is happening is there is still a growth coming from lights and used segment, and since we straddle a lot of various products, which is like tractors, construction equipment, cars and MEVs, lights, mini lights and heavies, we are able to keep our growth engine chugging along, though at a slightly lower rate, and that's why, if you recall, or if you happen to listen to our investor call, we had indicated a growth rate of around 15%, and we are confident of maintaining that growth. On the lab side, thankfully, because a lot of frivolous players who had been borrowing short and lending long has exited the market, there's a good amount of demand, and as long as we could borrow from banks and lend comfortably, we are able to grow that book also in the similar levels of around 15% growth percentages. So we see growth happening. We see growth happening, albeit at a cautious mode, but growth is possible if you could find the right customers to lend to.
All right. I know, of course, vehicle finance is the key area of your entire disbursement book. You're saying that your used vehicles is clearly doing better than new CVs, perhaps. With the kind of overall pain that we're seeing in the auto sector, would the housing side of your business become an area of focus?
Yeah, housing we have started recently in the sense of we are doing a very small quantum of around 120 to 150 crores per month. The biggest chunk of disbursement is on the vehicle finance where we do almost like around 2000 crores plus every month, and that is where the focus will be. The housing finance will be focused to scale up the growth, but it will not be the it will not be the game changer for the growth perspective for Chola, because it will take a little longer time to become a considerable part of our portfolio to influence the AUM growth.
All right. Thanks very much, Mr. Arulselvan. Appreciate you joining in, sharing your perspective. Borrowing at around 9% numbers, trying to keep it contained to that level. But of course, considering the kind of steps that have been taken by the Reserve Bank of India, that is really not what is being passed on to NBFCs like Cholamandalam Finance. That said, perhaps in a significantly better position than many of their peers. We have seen decent disbursement growth, in fact, fairly strong disbursement growth in spite of all the overhang that's being faced by the NBFC sector as well as the auto space, which is the primary point of focus for Cholamandalam Finance. Of course, it will remain to be seen how things pan out for financial year 20 going forward from here. But let's put focus then on some stock-specific action.